I'm going to sort of go back in thinking about Grenfell, because Grenfell exposed, I think, deep-seated inequalities in our society. It held a mirror to a neoliberal system where profits, where cost-cutting invaded every aspect of our lives. And 72 of our neighbors, our friends, our loved ones paid for that with their lives. And as the bereaved and the community approached the third anniversary, we really struggled with the idea of actually remembering, showing solidarity, coming together virtually. This was a very strange thing for us to feel that this is how we were going to remember. Remember last year on the anniversary, there were 12,000 people on the streets of North Kensington around Grenfell. We have monthly silent walks on the 14th of every month, which is held not just in our locality, but is held in lots of places across the country. And these have been suspended since February, since, the lockdown was declared. Now, before the lockdown, and I must say that when it was, we were told to socially isolate. For us, it felt like our voices had been completely shut down. And that was because we had the public inquiry, phase 2 of the public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire had just resumed. We had waited 9 months for the report from phase 1, which came out in October. A report which actually sought to apportion the blame for that fire on the night and why those people died to firefighters. So there was, a deep sense of anger already in the way that the first phase had actually, gone. However, there was a recognition of the fact that the cladding on that building was actually the key reason why that building burnt the way it did and why so many people died. However, a week into the phase 2 of the inquiry at the end of January into February, we then had, corporate witnesses demanding that they are provided with immunity from prosecution of their oral evidence that they were going to give at the public inquiry. And you can imagine the absolute horror that actually they'd had 14 months to apply for this immunity, but a week into phase 2, they suddenly demand this. Our cry was, you did the crime, now do the time. But they shut the inquiry a week into the phase 2 for another month while they made this application. And then we had literally 1 week of a return before actually one of the panel members went down with COVID, and that was the end of that phase of the inquiry. So it's been an incredibly frustrating, time for the community. We've gone into the third anniversary with a lot of anger, with a lot of frustration, with a lot of sadness, because there were 3 key demands that I think every single campaign in our local community actually have demanded from what's happened from Grenfell. 1 was truth, 2nd was accountability, and 3rd is justice and change. Now, when we look at truth, it seems that actually we're going to trade off truth for accountability. Because if the corporate eyewitnesses, those who we called responsible for corporate massacre of the loved ones, neighbors and friends, if they now asking for immunity from prosecution, we're not going to get accountability. We might get the truth of what happened and the decision making, and we're already starting to see that come out in January in the first phase, but we're certainly not going to get accountability. And I think that is causing enormous frustration and anger within the community. you know, there's a lot of us who feel that actually, if this was a tower block that was predominantly white, if this was in the south of the borough rather than the north of the borough, would we still be here 3 months on? You know, in terms of actually justice and change, the most basic thing that was recognized from phase one of the report from the inquiry was actually the role of cladding. And what have we seen? We've seen that cladding's been banned, but only from new buildings in 2021. And we have seen a massive stalling of actually the removal of cladding from buildings right across the country. We know that there are over 300 buildings, and that constitutes thousands of residents who are living in buildings with unsafe cladding, whether it's ACM, the cladding that was on Grenfell, or whether it's HPL, the high pressure laminate, or any other kind of dangerous flammable materials. And those people have had to endure social isolation in those buildings, going to bed every night wondering what's going to happen if there was a fire in their building. You know, there was a survey done by Inside Housing, and they said that 23% of people they surveyed said that they actually felt suicidal and wanted to self-harm because of the anxiety around actually living in an unsafe building like this. And the government, I think it's absolutely criminal that there's been no political will to actually implement what they said they would do 2 years ago. So that's what we face in terms of the most basic justice. But for this community, you know, justice means change. You know, this is a community, and just thinking of it in the context of Black Lives Matter, that this is a community that has gone through Grenfell. It's gone through, obviously, COVID, but it's also gone through a history of struggle. A history of struggle that goes back to the killing of Kelso Cochran in the 50s that led to what some call a race riot. You know, a lot of us attributed to the influence of Mosley in the area. However, that did lead to a fight to actually bring communities together. And we see that that's now flourishes in the shape of the fantastic Notting Hill Carnival, you know, the biggest carnival in Europe. We've also, as a community, gone through, you know, the historic fight of the Mangrove Nine. You know, people are probably aware of the fight of the Mangrove Nine, where a group of 9 black radicals actually had to stand trial because they called a demonstration, 150 people, 700 police appeared in the streets, there were massive clashes, and they were charged with inciting a riot. Now, without going through the history of that long case in 1970, what happened at the end was that actually they were victorious. They actually took on the power of the state, which went, you know, tried to clash with black power, and the state lost. There was a recognition of actually the fact that the police were institutionally racist. So this is a community, when Grenfell happened, that already had that history. And now we are faced yet again for a fight and a struggle for justice. And in particular, I think in the climates, you know, where we've gone into our 3rd anniversary in this kind of half virtual and half on the streets, we've gone through it in a period where we are watching amazing uprisings in Britain, uprisings in every state in America, uprisings in 18 countries across the world. And that has given us enormous hope, enormous, you know, we were quite buoyed by that in this, you know, particularly difficult time. Because the lockdown, you know, has taken its toll on the survivors. You know, people are struggling with grief, they're struggling with trauma, and then they really isolated. So having the anniversary in the period of Black Lives Matter has meant that actually we can start to demand as a community that actually the question of institutional racism that is implicated, deeply implicated in what happened at Grenfell, is actually included in the terms of reference when the inquiry opens, on the 6th of July. We demand, I think, as a community that, like I think the young people, that enough is enough. We demand that the state get their feet off our neck, because I think for us who've gone through the trauma of Grenfell, we now realize after 3 years that actually the only way we're going to get change is if they feel the breath, our hot breath on their knees. So we call for justice for Grenfell and Black Lives Matter. Thank you.